All right. So hi everyone. As Ahlan said, long time no see. We had a bit of a break. Um, we're also winding down. We're coming into some of the last calls for this first trimester. Um, and we're going into a gap, which doesn't mean we won't be in contact. It actually brings up opportunities to come up with some work-related calls, more practical things, particularly to do with music, but also other elements that you guys might be interested in. Also a time to check in, like tell your stories and put out your insights within your group and then even within the global group. So anyway, we're always connected. So I hope you're feeling good. Um, it's a lot happening inside, outside. We're sorry for the rescheduling that happened last week. Yeah, I wasn't feeling tippity top, and we were ending maybe the last group training that we're going to be holding in Maya for this season. So things have just really built up over the last months, and just the breathing space has been good. And I can see where it was needed as well. Even looking at my notes, there's really just so much harvesting that's happening in myself, like in my own brain. There's so much that um, is being put together. Um, so I'm just going to go maybe into a talk today, just on the themes. We sent out a PDF, I think 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, and um, it might be that you were able to look at the material. It may be that you were not. It's okay if you did not. There's some complexity in the essay provided that's linked in the PDF. This might take years to read, and there's something reflexive about it, where just asking people to read something complex is a process into itself. Just observing what does it mean to read within an inner dance dimensionality. I want to talk about reading today because I feel that reading has a lot to offer by way of understanding what's happening in the inner dance. Primarily because often reading is the opposing brain state in comparison or conjunction with the inner dance process. So I don't want to just talk about reading for the sake of reading or reading per se, but like I'd like to go back to what was it like to first learn to read. So reading, learning to read holds neuroplastic um, moments in the brain that we literally have to change the brain when we are learning to read. And I spent a lot of time with my children when they were learning to read, especially my daughter. I taught her how to read. So I was interested in what it was like to move into another dimension of thought. And I was really fascinated by her entering another world. Now, having said that, inner dance changes the brain also. And I'd like to juxtapose the changes that are happening in the reading and the the inner dance consciousness as we observe it in ourselves, as we observe it in others. There's a lot there, and bringing remembrance back to that moment actually opens up quite a bit that we might have forgotten and might be taken for granted. My interest in bringing up this subject or this topic has to do with how you might actually be able to trigger the same brain state that happens in reading while people are going through the journey. And it's going to be a fascinating thought to be able to do that. Um, that could happen automatically for some people, but for others, it does not. So um, a lot of you probably, as you go deep into the journey, into the feminine, into the vastness, you probably notice that it's not so easy to read like books. It's easy to read things on the internet, but to actually sit down and really spend time with the book, like I would put it out there, when's the last time you actually finished the book? Um, so it's not just the process, the inner dance or the Kundalini process, the energy transformation process. There are a host of influences that's establishing a feedback loop that's making things go faster in loops, in circles and cycles. That makes it difficult for the mind to go back to some of the slower ways of processing information. And this is just going to keep happening, like more and more. A fast thinking, a fast way of processing. And for me, I find it interesting and important to to hold on to some of the things that we gained when we were in slow thought, even as we enter into fast, you know, movements, fast flow. I think it's possible to hold both, and so I bring that up as an inquiry. Like, how do you hold a process um, that can simulate the extremes of these? Um, so I'm just using inner dance and reading as metaphors for something that's always like in there and out there. So as usual, we'll go into some aspects of psychology, of neurology, of linguistics, somewhat in anthropology, and let me go to the screen. I think the main theme for today, based in the PDF, is structure or structuralism. Erase yesterday's notes. Okay, so structure. Let's make this thick. What is structure in our process? Whereas a lot of people are used to the deconstructive elements in the work that we do. Like it's easier to see that the work helps to deconstruct people. Um, my task or my role, my passion is to help people understand that there's a lot of structure in there. And when we tap into it, often when you get in touch with it, you can feel it sometimes. It's like there's a structure. There's some kind of um networking or mapping that brings all of these many pieces together somehow. Like some kind of big picture is putting all the small pieces together. So structure we could maybe understand from a mental perspective. We would study the brain elements when we practice music. The brain and the music are interrelated. They're hipped together. Even in the body process, um, there are basically like short term and long term changes happening, bringing about a structuralism, a kind of structuralism um, that's always ongoing, like in us and in others. And so uh, I'm really interested in going into the structure within inner dance, which is just mirroring the structure within consciousness itself. And we're bringing in a meta cognition here. Like we're interested in how are we structured? How are you structuring a universe? How are you structuring an earth through your perception and experience of it? Um, and then is it possible to actually change that structure? Like all these are questions that might come up eventually when you keep holding the space, especially for other people. Like so in our trainings in Maya, like people they actually get surprised that, oh, okay, there's actually structure there, when the trainings that they attended were all about like there's no structure, just take out all structure and throw things out. That was the main point in the trainings they were attending. So they come here in order to perceive. Structure had always been there, even in the beginning. Well, even when inner dance started, I could already see the structure. I could hear it, I could feel it. It's just that it wasn't always explicit. The structure was implicit. I I knew a lot of the reasons why already we would bring the body into these um possibilities, these conditions. And a lot of you working with other bodies, working with your own body, you intuit what are the ways in which the thing is going to happen. I pulled out like a video on YouTube that I was interested in looking at today. Um, let's see. Let me make sure I'm sharing the sound. I wanted to watch it with you today, um, just as a possible starting point. This is actually one of the first videos. This is maybe the first video I put out when I came back to Palawan. I put out some old Mindanao videos a long time ago. And this man in this video, his name is Christian. He actually was the first person who ever asked me to conduct an inner dance training. Okay, he's Australian, but he lived in Singapore, and he was the first one, I think in 2010. He approached me and said, could you teach me what you do? So that was eventful in a way. It actually forced me to look at the structure through a theory of mind. I had to design a process for him to understand how inner dance worked. And so then he traveled the world with his wife later on, sharing inner dance, not just in Singapore, but across Europe, across, I think, parts of America. Uh,
My
let's not
story
watch the whole
began
video, just
with my
parts of
first
it.
ever inner dance experience. I'd never experienced a complete letting go before in my previous spiritual experiences. It was a wondrous feeling to be completely free, completely without thought, completely without emotion, but being aware of what was taking place within my physical body. For me, my first inner dance experience had complete full body convulsions accompanied by very, very loud, constant, long drawn out toning to a level which I'd never experienced before. For me, it felt very strong, very powerful, and a release, but also an opening at that point. I was absolutely exhausted after my first inner dance, but it had opened something up inside of me that I knew I would explore quite intensely over the preceding next period of time. Following that experience, it wasn't for another couple of months that I had my next inner dance experience, where I actually travelled to Palawan in the Philippines and partook in an inner dance in a nature setting, in a very natural setting, which was a complete contrast to the previous time where I performed inner dance. Again, a very similar experience. However, this time there appeared to be more colours, shapes that I could see, and more focused sounds that were being expressed, and also very intense experiences with my guides. Again, I knew that I wished to explore this further. At a similar time, we started to really examine our day-to-day lives from an inner dance point of view, or from a conscious trance perspective, and we identified a number of areas where we both should let things go and also bring in certain energies into our life.
Okay, I'm gonna stop there. It goes on. I can send a link later in case like you guys want to see that. Let's see. I want to juxtapose that with the video that I constructed just last week. I find that there were certain interesting things that Christians spoke there that we can listen to today in juxtaposition with certain things that are also happening in other people now. So that maybe brings us to inner dance way back, let's say 12 years ago, 12 to 13 years ago, I was saying, and this is like what's happening in Maya now. So this is Natalia. She is the inner dance. She's the one who founded inner dance in Poland. Now there's a lot of things happening in that country. But many years ago, no one was doing it when she brought it there. Right now, she lives in Canada. She hasn't been facilitating inner dance for a long time because of motherhood. She has 2 kids now. But she recently had visited Palawan, and she had so many questions about like what is it like to look at the process right now. I find Natalia really interesting because as she would share in this video, she's maybe one of the most emotional inner dance practitioners, like in my experience. Like all of her inner dances had always been very personal and very, very emotional. So she stepped into process in Maya or in Palawan, where we had been experimenting with different ways of holding the sound and people's bodies. So I'm just gonna press play on this and let's watch it together.
That my body after all these years, but this was so interesting because it was not personal. Like we were talking yesterday, Itul, you were mentioning this was the feedback that people were giving you guys, right? And I get it.
You never had an inner dance that was impersonal?
Never.
Yeah, never.
Never. It was always personal. Always. So, wow, this was like experiencing pure energy in a detached way in a little bit, I guess. It was beautiful, it was lovely, it was joyful, but I was feeling very physically, in a tangible way, electricity all over my face. But like, I thought you were shocking me with something. I thought you guys were like touching me with some, I'm like, what's happening? Because it was all around, like, you know, pins and needles, not even pins and needles. It was like really
Like
sharp electric feeling all over my face, all over my, especially my head, but also my arms, I think too. I don't remember now. That was incredible. Like what? I was just, and I was experiencing this dance of energy inside. It was going, it was just like a wave, up and down, and I was observing it. I could see the white white light too. It was expanding all around me.
We were laughing.
Was I laughing at? What was I
We were
laughing?
laughing.
Yeah, I was. I remember that I was laughing. I know it was just felt so. It felt so good. It felt so good. I don't even know why. I don't know why. I have no person. I don't know what to say. It was so
I
incredible.
wanted to borrow her body because I used to.
Okay, so maybe we'll stop there with Natalia. That one is on the YouTube channel if you wanted to see the whole thing. So yeah, I think there's a lot of structuralism in juxtaposing the experiences. The thing with Christian, that is more or less how people normally understand inner dance as an experience, as a construct, and then bringing up this particular video with Natalia. It's actually like a rare documentation on something that we've been working on for some years already in inner dance, in terms of using certain instruments or even just the voice, certain ways of touching or holding the body, certain ways of using words, and the noise app. So if I was to go back to my board, right? Oops. So how to hold all these? Within the actual philosophy of structuralism, there is a way, and I shared this essay with you, the essay by Roman Jakobson, who is a Russian linguist, whom I find a very important thinker, that whose work very verily describes inner dance so much in so many different ways. Well, one of his contributions to the understanding of what's happening in and out of us is the regression hypothesis. He brought up this idea that somehow when we begin to lose our language and our minds, I don't know if you had the time to look into the orange section of the wiki of our website, going into aphasia, going into the orange, going into what electricity does, how we tend to lose aspects of the mind and language, which in a way brings about a regression, which we would point out also brings about like progress. There is progression happening in the regression. I feel this is one of his more important points. Now, we'll go back to that later. Particularly what I'm interested in looking at is what Roman Jakobson calls code and context. So I would say we were looking or watching the Christian video to look at the model of what does inner dance look like within context. And when we watch Natalia, the Polish lady, then that's inner dance in code. So when we study playlists, for example, playlists can either be more inclined towards this, like up here, this would be inclined towards space, spaciousness, spatiality, or it could be inclined according to time. So you have a choice to bring about code and context in people's brains. And I find that the essay by Roman Jakobson, there's so much there that speaks about how a brain and a mind is actually structured. There's an actual structure within time and space that becomes quite visible when we either undergo a brain damage or in our setting, like a spiritual awakening process. So what he had been observing in his work in aphasia, and the work in aphasia is also the work in inner dance, because we do trigger the aphasic brain when we bring up like a kind of light language. If we kept on watching the Christian video, he would have talked about when he went into his inner dance process, he discovered this thing called inner language. A lot of people call that light language, where he would be speaking a kind of gibberish that actually starts to transmit code. There is something in Christian's video that is interestingly code based as well, and it's in his words when he said his first inner dance was when he experienced for the first time a space of no emotion. I'm only bringing up Christian in the context aspect of things because of the body movements that were happening in his experience, and also um, just the way we were using music back then, which was to sequence events as opposed to holding things in simultaneity. um, okay. So I want to go into this mapping today with you. In my own work, I follow this mapping. So when I hold people in the process, I'm very aware of this. When I create a playlist and send that out to, like, let's say a cancer patient or a small child, I'm very conscious of these two. I'm very conscious that I might either bring people too much into one or the other. It could, happen in either way. It's either you go too much into code or too much into context. And the Jacobson essay describes what that actually could be like. Just to give an example, and I took this up in the previous Zoom call, but I do find it important. Like there was a lady sitting beside me when I was conducting the demo with Natalia, and she did a training like a long time ago with one of these other movements that came from inner dance that now has another name. She claims she attended the very first training that was held within that movement, many years ago. It's in London. But basically, she told me that she was going through this thing over and over again. She was one of the people who approached me during the training that says she was actually shocked that there was structure in the inner dance, because in the trainings that she went to, there was supposed to be no structure. That was the instruction given. And because of that, like, she had been going through this thing called the loop, like endlessly. Like in all of her processes, a loop probably in a general way means she keeps going around in circles, meaning she's caught in a loop. And in a loop, she's always experiencing the same emotions, the same thoughts, the same behavior. And she was wondering in that, like, is it actually possible to change considering she's looping? I find this like a fascinating idea. Don't know if you remember this movie, The Groundhog Day. I do believe that there is an actual loop in space and time that breaks the linearity of time. So then we experience like circular time, or the Ouroboros. Like a long time ago, like as a child, I was being told these stories all over the Philippines where people would get stuck in an actual loop. It's either they're in a car, and this even happened to my dad. My uncle went through this. I had friends who experienced it. I don't know what it was decades ago that this is still possible, but they'd be, let's say, in a car, and then suddenly, like, they would pass like maybe a sign or a person, and then they would just keep going on the road, and then they'd see the person again, and then they'd see the person again, and they would get stuck in this loop, and they often wouldn't know how to break out of it. So there's a superstition or a kind of practice in the Philippines that if you get stuck in a loop, what you're supposed to do is take off your shirt and inverted, then you put it on, and then you break the loop. I don't know if you have this in your culture, if you've heard this before, but for me, the loop is real. For those who have undergone psychedelics, the loop is there. That like somehow you get stuck in the moment, and you keep going back to it for one reason or another. Like I like to bring up Groundhog Day because there was a lesson in that um, the lead character he got stuck within the same day and he couldn't get out of it. So he mastered the day until he got really tired of being like an asshole, like a bad person. So he just worked in improving himself. Like he became kind to others. He learned the piano. He became, because he knew everything that's going to happen in that day. So he was able to manipulate time and space in a certain way. So I would admit that I've experienced that loop like plenty of times where I would just suddenly I'd go into a sudden moment where I could see the infinite possibilities within one moment, one day, 1 hour, one minute. And so it does become possible for like an inner dance journey to become like an infinite time space that takes like a long time to process. And you have these techniques that when you bring up your tools, when you bring up your let's say let's go into that maybe just to bring some practicality. Did I share the sound? Yeah, the sound is shared. Okay. Let's see. Just to maybe recreate without instruments like what I was doing with Natalia. Say look for a particular sound. Like if I wanted to bring someone into code, I would look for some consistent tonality or sound. Say I need to press hold. So then that could bring people into a basic frequency that they acclimatize to. So as soon as you play that acclimatizes in people's bodies. I could add a note here and there, and then I could just leave that there. So simple synthesizers like these are effective enough to hold. Now, one basic tool to hold a loop is rhythm. So here, this is a drum machine. And I actually just downloaded this right before the call. I was just looking for anything in particular. So I'm going to press play. Okay, so that's a basic element in music that is easy to understand. Like the rhythm allows for repetitions in time. And in the Natalia demo, I was holding on to a drum machine back then that brought her into code outside of context. So that's maybe one way of well, this is cat that's roaming and like doing things behind me. So we try to establish like a rhythm. In fact, to establish like the circularity within time, and that had always been existent in language, music, thought. That loop belongs within the day, so that you can depend on the fact that there's that there's light and dark that goes around in cycles, rhythms. There's a loop there, so that when you hold the loop, when you do hold the loop for other people to acclimatize to, getting them to lay down, you actually have a lot of power given to you to bring people into the moment. So in a way, either you you break out of a loop or you break into a loop. Okay, like just simply asking a person to lay down and then to close the eyes, exposing them to these simple things. What I demonstrated was frequency, really basic building blocks of music, which could bring forth a lot of decoding and encoding, and then basic elements in rhythm. Um, it can either bring people into the mind or out of the mind. Okay, and this is something we would try to understand, especially from a neurological or brain-based perspective, just to reveal what's often invisible in the process. Going back to Roman Jakobson's essay, um, if you had read it, he talks about different types of language disturbances or different types of aphasia. We had a call yesterday where we went into the experience of Saule, who holds inner dance in Lithuania, who experienced what could be called receptive aphasia, which is a sudden inability to understand the words that other people are saying. So this is going to happen again and again in the sessions where people will either lose the ability to talk normally or they will lose the ability to hear the words in a way that they would comprehend them, which means that we're altering the part of the brain that is responsible for language comprehension. That there is a part of the brain that's responsible for decoding the words. So going back to the essay of Roman Jakobson, there are people who lose some of these abilities to either produce or understand language, and this is what the work kind of does. So either you experience what's called code aphasia or context aphasia, which means that you either um, alter the time scaling, the way you're establishing timing, so that when you speak, either your speech starts to get mixed up in terms of the way you're combining the words, combining the letters. Turns out to be the kind of light language that people are going through. When bodies are moving, that's also recombining or moving around like information that's in the body. And then when people experience code aphasia, which should be nearer to what Saula had experienced, she had problems with how people were naming concepts. Like she couldn't handle the naming process. So simple words like hi, hello. She was describing like she didn't understand what table meant. We had a Zoom call many months ago where Christina didn't know what this word meant. Like she was trying to process it in her mind. Like I don't know what that means. um, so these aren't problems per se. They're actually opportunities. We've spoken enough about how this could help us understand how the brains can be rewired so that transformations can occur. The main thing we're studying here is that there are differences in aphasia. So when you do experience energy process, it's either you are going more into space or into time, right? Yeah. So knowing this will help you design the process. And I think the bottom line is to hold both so that people aren't inclined to go too much into one or the other, that they can hold both. That they can hold both. So okay. Um let's go back into this concept of reading. And I think this would be really interesting for teachers out there. We have a lot of teachers in our group, and we also probably have a lot of parents. So remember reading. Do you remember what it was like to read? Now, I was an avid reader. I used to read as many as 3 books a day sometimes as a child. I had the ability to speed read when I was 15, 16, I was 12. Because of my life circumstances. My dad was really strict and I couldn't go out of the house, so I couldn't do anything else but to read. So I read a lot. I ran out of books. I would get my sister's books. I would read all those books and then I'd run out of that. My dad had a humongous library. So in my inner dance brain, I actually was anchored in the reading brain. Now, reading is a magical experience. So if you remember, at least when you're reading, reading brings you into like magical virtual worlds. Like reading allowed you to visit worlds that aren't here, worlds that are there. They could be fantasy worlds, science fiction worlds, they could be nonfiction worlds. Reading allows you to visit other people's minds. It allows you to visit other people's creativity and imaginations. So how is that even possible? When I was spending time with my daughter, right now she's 10. She started to try to learn to read at about 7. I really delayed her reading ability to as late as possible because of what I know about inner dance. So then I was there when she was learning to read during the pandemic. So I would literally go into um, the phonetic units one at a time. I would go w, o, r, d again and again. And then it would annoy her and it would excite her to just keep going into, okay, like I can actually arrange these sounds to become one complete word. And I was really experimenting with as many words as possible. And I would watch what is happening in her own mind as she would take in the whole word, but then take in every single sound. So reading requires, firstly, that uh, it requires 3 things. Okay, reading requires trying to remember, like semantics, um, and orthography, and uh, phonology. Without these 3, reading wouldn't be possible. Let me make an adjustment here. Semantics would be the meaning of the word meaning. So if I was to look at this in particular, it wouldn't mean anything if I didn't have an actual definition of what is a word. So this would just register in the brain as a bunch of pictures, and it wouldn't click as a meaningful thing. Orthography would be the word form. So meaning there needs to be some kind of a lexicon or a way of spelling WORD, so it's not DROW or ORDW. So there needs to be certain rules and syntactical elements to understand some system. And then the phonology would be the sound structure. It would be simply about that sound even exists at all, and that sound is repetitive, it is constant. So putting all these 3 together, what makes for me reading a language so important and so amazing is that the mind has to learn internal representations of what is out there in the world. They're pictures, they're symbols that exist inside our minds. they might be mirrored outside the world, but for a person like a child to learn to take in a word, a concept, an idea, a thing, I need to have like sections or categorizations inside my own mind of what this means, of what all of these mean, one at a time. Like a- and this is something we're visiting, like we're either breaking down, breaking apart, or something we're rebuilding in the inner dance journey. So a lot of people, as we know, they're going into this light language thing where there's a lot of experimentation with the restructuring of the sound structure. So in a way, the sound structure goes away. Or in orthography, if you take away the sound structure, the word forms would also kind of go away. And in many ways, what that does is the words don't mean anything, either momentarily or for a lot of people, they just throw out the word. So when we visit upon the aphasia element in inner dance, and we can maybe ask some people here to share what it was like to lose some part of language. Um, we the reason why that happens is people are able to enter a world that doesn't mean anything, a meaningless world. Some people might call that an existential crisis. Um, that could lead to a meaningful world once we start to understand how do we even make meaning at all. And having said this, you might understand now why are we even talking about this. We're interested in structuralism. We're interested in how are you constructing a world from the ground up. And all these things that I'm sharing, they are the basic building blocks for building a mental structure as we are becoming experts at how to deconstruct structure. Okay, so let's look at the music as a metaphor right now. What does music do? Wait, sorry, it's messy. I'm just trying to create space. Let me just erase. Why does music have this effect in people? Why does it work? Why is music becoming central to the spiritual awakening process for so many people? Why is it becoming a healing device? Um, it's because music touches upon a certain parts of the brain that um, are archaic. For one, archaic means old. There was a man named Terence McKenna who coined the term archaic revival. So in the 1960s and the 1970s, when people were taking psychedelics and undergoing these new age spiritual awakening journeys, especially in America, he observed that the brain was undergoing a archaic revival, a kind of regression into like ancient, like we're going back to the tribal or the indigenous brain. And we know enough that music holds a role in bringing about the archaea in the brain. And I feel that music taps into pre-verbal mind states, the mind that is prior to language, like the proto-lingual mind. Like we're visiting the mind that had yet to go into the proto-manifestations of language. So inner dance visits upon the old brain, the very, very old brain. Um, now, uh, let's maybe look at the brain per se. To be useful to have a visual on this, just to kind of understand what are we doing to people? What are we doing to um what are we doing to ourselves? What are we doing to people? Um, Wait, let's bring up Saulus aphasia. Say live Monet. Hope the internet's strong. Okay, let's visit the orange in case some of you haven't gone there. We brought this up in the early call, but it's worth bringing up again. So there's a section on language within the orange. And here, this is Saule. She describes way back in 2018, this event in which, yeah, she lost the words. I do not anymore have the same feelings with simple words like hello, thank you, table, chair. Yesterday, she described how she actually just simply went to the space where there was this no time. She let me stop share screen. It was really fascinating to listen to her speak because of how she describes this really weird space she entered into. It was 9 months where there was no time. There was this absolute absence of time. Like people would mention words like ancestors, and then she would look inside her mind and said, there are no ancestors. Yesterday didn't happen. Okay, like and there was something about the way inner dance is being held back then in 2017, 18, where we were at the height of the context style of inner dance that was beginning to shift into space. So it's really, really interesting to actually listen to her speak yesterday about losing her abilities to comprehend language and even to speak language in certain ways. So that's like when you study language and especially reading, so juxtaposing that with music, reading and speaking, writing, listening, all of these require time because the way language words works, there has to be a sequence or a contiguity between different gross constituent units. Like here, these are phonemes or letters. So T, I, M, E, they need to follow each other in a sequence. So one of the reasons why it becomes difficult to either, let's say, produce language in this way, language production, or to comprehend language, is when we become space, then when we become overly space, like spacey is like a word we use here. Are you spacey right now? When we lose time, we lose the ability to sequence gross constituent units or just parts of a whole. Okay. Now, when you learn language, there's a hermeneutic circle happening where the different parts, let's say, let's signify parts. It's like points in a map. For you to understand the meaning of each of the point, you need to understand the whole. Okay, the parts needs to have a relationship with the whole, so that as you understand part per part, just keep adding parts, the more you actually understand the whole. This is how the mind works, and this is how time and space are coordinated with each other in the mind. So when you lose time, there is a greater sense of wholeness, but what we lose is the ability to hold the parts in place. So very often, let's say when people, I know a lot of people when they go into psychedelic journeys, it becomes very hard to think in a sequence. And a lot of people when they take, let's say, ayahuasca or magic mushrooms, they actually try to attempt to write things down. They would bring a notebook and then they'd bring a pen and then they'd try to write down the experience while they're in it. And then I would ask them, how did that go? And then they'd scratch their head, show me the notebook, and it's just like a bunch of squiggles. And eventually, they would try. But psychedelics and sometimes the work that we do, we destroy the writing brain. We destroy the reading brain because we lose the sequencing abilities and we enter into space, which is really good. It brings us a sense of the wholeness, but verily we sometimes lose parts. And so you would hear a lot of people start to share, like, I can't remember certain things, or I can't coherently align my thoughts right now. And sometimes you need some support in order to navigate thoughts. So looking at the Jacobson essay, people who go into context aphasia, or what he calls contiguity aphasia, very often when you experience like a damage of the part of your brain that coordinates time, it becomes difficult to understand how to start a sentence. So sometimes people don't know how to speak because they don't know how to begin. But when they hear someone speaking, within, let's say, a very, very social environment, let's say, okay, like I can get a sense of what someone's saying, then they just start to go on and on, not nonstop. They can just keep going and going and going. But contiguity aphasia would be quite strange, where people would start to mix up the ways the words are combined. They would damage word combination. They would just keep combining words on and on and on, and they would create like a word salad where the sentence doesn't make sense anymore. They just keep going on and on. I've seen this happen in people in retreats. They would just keep on talking nonstop, displacing meaning where nothing would mean anything because they just keep pushing meaning away, on and on and on. So the extreme of that, which would be code aphasia, is when people become space where things are happening all at once, not one at a time. Then people, as I said, either lose the capacity to name things, or they would simply utter like a single word to try to describe everything. It's like they would utter some seemingly irrelevant word without anything else. So that's extremely like taking something as a whole without being able to take in any of the parts. I'm trying to describe this, but it's hard to point to it because there are a lot of manifestations of this. So just to describe context aphasia, there are personality types that are very social in nature, where a lot of words are going to be spoken, but it's very hard to arrive at the actual point in the discussion. Like we can use a lot of words, but there's no actual point to speaking. And then there are certain personalities and cultures that are more inward. And it's very important in those cultures that you arrive at the point. Like when you're using words, when you're speaking, you need to arrive at the point. Now, when I first started to conduct inner dance, maybe 16 years ago or 15 years ago, I was more here. Like I used to try to describe the thing called inner dance in a loop where I kept using the same words, and I would just keep going on and on to try to describe something that couldn't be described in words, that would arrive at a point. I had to really train myself to learn to become clear. And a lot of facilitators that will go through these, where they would experience like using a lot of words to try to arrive at meaning. And there would be a lot of experimentations: what concept, what theme, what to say, how do I channel what's going on in other people's minds. And then the more you learn how to hold space, the point becomes clear. It's the point like 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 the people who would be there are converging the point. What's the collective point? What is the coherent point in the environment, like in the ecosystem or within me that's mirroring what's happening out there? This could take years to balance code and context. It could take quicker, especially if you understood what was happening. So when you study the playlists, say, let's go into the website now. When you study the different playlists, say, let's go to experience, the experience page. This is just the playlist for January to March to March. And then we go into other experimentations starting in May. All of these playlists are constructed like differently. And like I'm enjoying this one by Gra. She put one out recently where she experimented with a playlist that had like songs, familiar songs that she made weird. And then she also took in like a lot of spoken word elements along with frequency and noise. And the experiences people would have in experimentations like these, they would be particularly specific. Like this one, I really liked. There was mystical elements there. There was the dragon, fire, destruction, but then there was the core trauma. There was something personal there. But within the re-traumatizing oneself, she also was able to bring about like an observation process, where she was able to have a conversation with her dad, her abusive dad, where she got to talk to him like, I'm okay, you're not okay. And she went into maybe a transactional analysis process here, and looking at the cycle of trauma. The trauma ended, and then there was a realization of like who she was beneath or underneath the trauma. So I'm interested in this because there was spoken word in the playlist. You then actually activate the reading brain, and not just the the energy brain. So in this, there's a lot more consciousness, like in this. When I created Anything is Possible, I was working in the same experimentation where there was spoken words there, but I was trying to match the vibrations that was rising and falling like in waves. I was chatting with Alaitz today, and then Christina sent this earlier, like yesterday, and then she sent me something that I thought it would be interesting to share, because I find it's descriptive of what we're studying now. Okay, in just a moment. So Alaitz is an artist. She's a painter. I'm sure she's with us today. And what she's doing is she's putting on the playlist while she is in her studio. And I think there's something very beautiful in how she might be translating sound into image. Okay, this is taking a little bit long, right? Stop the share and maybe just go a little bit into Jakobson before looking at the Laitz's painting. Roman Jakobson was also responsible for giving us the translation theory. And for him, there were three types of translations. 1, 2, 3. First type of translation is interlingual, where there could be translation between languages, so from, say, Greek to Chinese. Don't know why I always bring that up as an example. So let's say within the English words, there are translations between similar words in English So there's still like an intralingual translation happening there. A third type of translation in Roman Jakobson's thought is intersemiotic translation, where there would be a transmutation between, let's say, sound into image, into maybe words, into maybe body movements. These things we talk about again and again through our process together. So let's see. Let's see if this is opened up. Okay, thank you. Alliance. We'll do check-ins later. I'm not sorry, just saw your message. So she's describing her process here. This is her check-in. Like she's been listening to Anything is Possible for many months now, and this is her inner dance. This is her way of processing. So maybe this means a lot to some of us. Maybe for some it doesn't mean anything. But for me, the image holds like a lot of meaning. And what she's done is she's embedded the sound into an image, right? So taking that as a consideration, especially for those who might be interested in using art as a device, we want to understand what is sound even, and what is an image, what is a word. There was a famous song that came out like in the 1970s, I think, or 70s. And it starts out as this: if a picture paints 1,000 words, let's take out if just to make that declarative. Our minds store pictures and images, and we innovated, we invented ways to store sounds, and words are sounds basically, because words are combinations of sounds, you know, and maybe the sounds actually hide thousands of images as well. Somehow they're co-implicating like each other. This doesn't mean so much yet when we look at it from a figurative perspective, but when we try to study the brain process, let's go back to the brain app. And I'm sorry for jumping in and out of these. Let's say this would be the part of the brain that registers the image. And then this would be the part of the brain that registers the sound. This is where the auditory cortex is located. This is where the visual cortex is located. Now, when you learn to read, there needs to be a co-activation mostly of this blue part here, this yellow part at the top here, and this green part down here. So learning to read means you need to associate the sounds, the space, the sensation of space, and the images together so that they start to hold meaning. There has to be a coordination of all the information that's embedded here, here, and here. And when we do conduct the inner dance, we actually break that apart. We dislocate those association areas. So let's say language, especially reading, becomes possible. Language is actually a coordination between sound and image and space. Space would be okay, how do I describe this? Space is often motoric in nature. So when we think about the inner dance, when people's bodies are moving in the process, it's because we're moving things around in space. That is one of the purposes for why the body moves like that. And even when the body isn't moving, there's still things moving around in space. Now, language becomes possible when we coordinate like all these things together. And when you put these together, what you have is meaning. Now, when you ask people to lay down, this kind of goes away because we dislocate the connection between these two. You know, what translates or allows them to be congruent, we momentarily halt, we suspend, or we bracket out the connection between these. Naturally, the brain or the nervous system would later find the congruence. But one of the reasons why language goes away is a transformation often means momentarily being able to recombine the simple elements so that we can make new things out of them. That's what structuralism technically is about. Structuralism as a philosophy, right, studies how do you break down, let's say, the complex. So right now you're listening to me speak words. I'm making sounds with my body. I'm transmitting that. And then when you hear what I'm saying, you're breaking those down. Now, when you start to facilitate, when you start to share things, when you start to articulate, then you begin to construct things, right? So remember the Christian video? Christian has a tendency to not be laying down. There's something very interesting in his inner dance where he's upright, he's standing up, and he's often vocalizing, even though the vocalization is light language or inner language, which is like speaking in codes, not in context. There's more construction happening in his process. So the reason why we ask people to lay down is people aren't really breaking things down enough. So the reason why we ask people to close their eyes and to lay down is there is an actual listening space. We teach people to listen. And so especially when they receive sound, there is a deconstruction of sound elements. And when enough sounds have been deconstructed, that's when images begin to appear. Okay. Now, the relationship between sound and image is extremely important. So that when you construct or design your process, thinking or knowing that you can either just use music purely as music. Let's say your thing is to use songs. You look for songs in Spotify, or you borrow music from others and you play that into people's bodies. A lot of people ask why do images don't do why is it that images or colors do not appear in certain inner dances? When you begin to experiment with verbal cues, like putting words into the playlist or speaking the words themselves whilst the journey is happening, this is when a structuralism, from a constructivist point of view, that's when it begins to take place. That's not just the breaking down or the deconstruction part. And what I'm trying to describe here is if you bring in the association elements back in the brain, because what we do is we disassociate. That is the starting point. A lot of the techniques that have been learned intuitively by many is when you ask people to lay down, there's a disassociation that begins to happen between the sounds and images in people's minds. And so the words start to jumble and become meaningless, you know? They start to intermix, or they start to go weird inside people's heads. Things like that. the rules, the combinations start to intermix. When you playlist, you start to uncombine and recombine familiar elements into unfamiliar ones. So that's how a dissociation takes place. So when you start to experiment with mixing the music with more conscious elements, when people are going through these, that's when associations once again start to happen. So literally, let's say when you put people into fMRIs or EEGs, and it's really, really interesting to do that. When you expose people to words that they can comprehend, there are certain things that light up. So when you expose written words to an illiterate person, a person who doesn't know how to read, a lot of these don't actually light up. A lot of the association areas, um, the imagination areas in the brain, they don't light up basically. And what I'm trying to share here is that there are different ways of holding the energy space to bring out this imagination zone, like inside people. Like one of the ways to understand the zone is to study the default mode network. The default mode network is it's the thinking without thinking that happens when we some people call it absent-minded thinking or absent thinking. It's when you're able to process the things that are more or less like in the unconscious or the subconscious. Say let me clean this up. It's just messy. There could be either thought in presence or thought in absence. And the default mode network taps into various brain states or brain parts that allows for imagination to happen. There could be the part that's visual spatial, and this is called the precuneus. The angular gyrus is responsible for reading and the written language in general. It's responsible for metaphors. I'm going to explain why this is important later on. The posterior cingulate cortex is responsible for autobiographical thinking. Autobiographical. It allows you to think about the self through the mirror. And then this is the one that's most important. It's the dorsal medial, no, not the brain part, but the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex helps to modulate emotional responses. Let's say modulate emotions. Okay, so I'm about to explain to you how inner dance works. What is it that we do that allows people to go into that deep space? Okay, let me make space for now. Let's make this tuck this away somewhere until we need it again. I want to look at the loop once again. It could be like a thinking loop. It could be like an emotion loop. And it was noticed in many inner dance communities that were using still the same kind of music. A lot of people loop back around the same emotion. So let's say my partner Italy, when she was talking about in Finland, when she was observing some like older inner dance communities that were still using the same songs, they kept going back to the same trauma or the same emotion again and again. After years, like 4 years, 5 years later, it's still the same thing with the mother, the father, and there hasn't really been that much processing that had occurred as compared to maybe some communities that were learning how to break the loop. So one of the reasons why the loop is maintained has something to do with, okay, so the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, which is one of the brain states that are activated during the default mode network, or absent thinking, which is thinking without thinking. They say dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. Initially, what we're breaking in the inner dance process is the control held by the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Now, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is what is responsible for attention, maintaining focus, like being here, being in the present moment. And the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is very much attached to the amygdala, which has to do with emotions, motor programs, which is the nucleus accumbens, and what else? It's the like memories, which is the hippocampus. And what else is there? Yeah, just these three. So these comprise a kind of loop. And sometimes we might ascribe this to be part of the worry loop. This is responsible for keeping people in anxiety. Okay, so when you study this, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is maintaining attention. So it's pretty much like thinking in a way that's trying to analyze things based on what one knows from the past. And then moods help to keep that attention going. So people wanting to feel good, people wanting to avoid pain, and then programming the body to keep that loop going, and then trying to remember the same things over and over again. So the inner dance has been a way of breaking this loop. We know enough how this loop is broken. It has to do with the rerouting of dopamine that keeps us going. Like dopamine keeps these going. It keeps going the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, keeps going the amygdala, the nucleus accumbens, and the hippocampus to keep worrying, to keep anxious, to keep identifying with an emotion. So dopamine, we know how to reroute already by shifting rhythms in music, by shifting the layers in music. Dopamine is rerouted into other brain elements, which is the striatum is something we're implicating in the long term. So that can constitute like a break. That can break the loop initially. Now, breaking the loop can change people's lives. A lot of people, they like to say that, wow, that process changed my life. But the break that offers is actually very short term, so that you can have an experience of breaking the loop, but the loop doesn't actually last. The breaking of the loop doesn't last long, so that people can keep going back to the same inner dance, the same emotion, the same trauma. And there's actually a possible addiction to breaking the loop, so that you're looping around the breaking. You want to keep breaking the loop and keep breaking the loop because it feels good. And so you keep going back to the sessions, the workshops to keep breaking the loop, but it actually creates like a bigger loop. So that's more or less something we can do. We can break the trauma in the short term, but that doesn't mean that we are able to heal that from a more long-term perspective. Now, studying other brain axes or brain, this is still a brain loop, like the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, the precuneus and angular gyrus, they're still interconnected to each other. So I want to focus initially on the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. They're quite near each other. They're in the same Brodmann area. It's Brodmann area 9, 8 or 9. But the dorsolateral the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is very, very different than the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. How do I explain this? Say, let's say you are in uh, a, a fear-based situation, something scary. Like, let's say, my recent example in Maya in trainings, when I try to get people to imagine this. Let's say you're in a dark pathway in the forest, walking alone. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, and then suddenly something jumps out of the bushes. Let's say it's a clown, and you don't know what to do. You're alone, and then this clown jumps out. What do? You can either react from a fear state, and that would be the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex at work. You would snap into attention, and then you would go into a fear response, and then you would tell your body, okay, you need to run away right now because there's this clown here in the middle of nowhere, and I don't know if it's going to kill me or not. And it's going back into all these memories of, let's say, watching horror movies with these like clowns killing people, or even just going back into your memory banks and seeing how absurd this thing is. And it's so absurd that this is probably like a dangerous situation. So it would trigger the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex to pay even more attention so that you can run away even faster and be more afraid. So the part of the brain that can modulate that fear is the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. So this is the part that might be called, like in spiritual circles, like the witness, the observer. So even as your heart, let's say your heart rate goes up, your heart is palpitating, you're super duper scared, there is a part of the brain that could slow down rather than speed up. There's a part of the brain that says, okay, wait a minute, okay, I don't know what's happening, and in not knowing, I am able to think more slowly and more clearly. So for example, the angular gyrus being responsible for metaphor and reading and writing, the reading writing brain is the part of your brain that allows you to go into another dimension. Remember, it allows you to go into other virtual realms so that you're not taking the situation literally. You're basically looking at the situation from a metaphorical perspective, and it actually is what allows you to step back and observe and just to witness. So there's a part of you that may not run away anymore. It might maybe talk to the clown, like, what are you doing? Who are you? What are you supposed to be? What are you supposed to be? So in the inner dance process, in the journey, when you trigger people, and you will trigger people because that is the mechanism, right? Heightening the sympathetic nervous system, whilst the parasympathetic nervous system is being co-activated. The the DMN network, especially through reading and writing, is activated through it's a subconscious consciousness. It's a heightened consciousness where more of your brain state is awake. Whereas when you're, let's say, when you're in that dangerous situation and you get triggered into an emotional response, your brain capacity will get reduced, maybe even just to 2% or 3%. It is being activated. At that situation, when you are experiencing stress, would it be possible to activate 98% or 99%, or maybe even like 100%? So this is going to be useful for you when you're designing, because as I'm observing, there's a lot of facilitation styles out there that's really just looking at palpitating hearts, conducting trigger mechanisms, and trying to bring about emotional response mechanisms. And a lot of these different experimentations in an inner dance, this is what I was trying to demonstrate with the Natalia video, when you are able to hold the witnessing process, like what's a way to understand this? What I'm trying to help you develop is a way of not always giving people what they want. Hold back and and when you allow people to go deep without relying on some of the tempting trigger mechanisms that you will be conducting for sure, it's really tempting. So in most trainings that we hold, when we open the space so that people can work on other people's bodies for the first time, the temptation is to trigger people. It's to make a lot of noise. It's to push the body. It's to try to get some kind of response to happen. Like what I'm sharing with you rids you of that temptation to just trigger people. You will be interested in the trigger mechanisms because those hold important roles in confronting fear. But I want you to develop the holding back mechanism, that just staying there. And this allows people to enter the code elements in the process. Going back here then, um, like a lot of experimentations are really more towards here. It's using sequential music, triggering music, to then start to experiment with frequencies and even wordings to develop your own voice, to hold a space where you develop your own voice. A lot of people, they start with speaking through the music only, speaking in a way that vibrates. But then months or years after holding just the music, the words would start to appear. You will find your own voice, and that voice is going to be the voice of the room. And that is holding code and context equally in subconscious consciousness. So it's not merely to set people off, to throw them over the edge and to see what would happen. It's actually to learn to contain the space like a lot more, and that would require that you would re-access the reading brain, which you would momentarily turn off, like in the beginning, which is responsible for the rerouting of dopamine, which is why inner dance began to work in the first place a long time ago. Having learned this, now we would learn like this new way. And and why? Like, what is the point? To to um to learn this other way signifies development. Like when scientists have exposed brains to reading in the long term, there's neuroplasticity at work. So we're careful not just to deconstruct and destroy brains, to rid people of unnecessary brain connections that's holding trauma. When you then bring structuralism about, uh, reading and writing actually increases brain volume, especially gray matter brain volume. Reading and writing allows for myelination of synapses. It allows for more connections in the brain to become strengthened. So in a way, when you do that, there is now a commitment to what connections in your nervous system do you activate. So the activations won't be random anymore. There would be a strengthening of synapses in a way that would lead to habit formation, where you would re-enter language in a way that's a lot more what you choose to be coming from you, you know? So that doesn't need to be language in the verbal. That could be like visual language. That could be notoric language. Just understanding that there will be a time when patterns would solidify or concretize, and that's when development has happened. So early on, this is something you could already inculcate or include in your process. So when you start studying how playlists are constructed, you would study the old inner dance modality that can really trigger people and bring about the emotional response mechanism. But then you're studying like another way, which is how to increase intelligence levels. Okay, so we had a Zoom call yesterday that was recorded. Maybe just ask your local space holder if you want access to that. We brought up some interesting things in philosophy and theory that looks at structuralism, which I find quite important. I didn't bring those up today. I wanted to ground the elements to something a lot more concrete. Yeah, just so we're not looping, we're not repeating the same thing. So you know, you have the whole year to access those. So I'm going to open up the space. I see maybe there might be questions. There's a lot of things happening in the chat. Yeah. I brought up your painting alliance as well, so if you wanted to share. But I would be happy if you guys can now take over. Ahilan, you can help me to host the conversation. You know, on insights, questions, and so on and so forth. I hope you found this interesting.
Oh yeah, we have for the Reinhilde. Hi, Reinhilde. Hi.
Hi, everyone. I have something to share, and maybe have. I would like to have feedback from Pi. For almost 6 months, I've been listening every night to playlists, and I loved it a lot. I felt like structured, or I felt like I got a new life. And recently, a week or so, for a week or so, I started with by going to bed to sleep with deconstruction and regression and progression. So the two in a loop. And I noticed I had a lot of dreams and nightmares. And after several days, I started to, when I woke up 2 hours later, I changed again to put back playlist for the rest of the night. So maybe I'm in a loop, I don't know. Maybe I'm in a loop of wanting to deconstruct, and probably. And I wanted to share this to have a feedback from Pi.
Yeah.
Is this a good idea to continue this or whatever? Thank you for your feedback, Pi.
Okay. I super love this. Thank you for this particular sharing from Belgium. Reinhilde is a medical practitioner in Belgium and in France, and she's studying the inner dance deeply to see how she can apply this to her patients and clients. So this is really interesting to consider even from that perspective. There's a structuralist, there's a really beautiful structuralist approach to what you brought up that still considers the same model in Jacobson. It's just that this is in Jacques Lacan and Sigmund Freud. So this is more to do with dream theory or an understanding of the different types of dreams. Now, in this model, there are basically two main types, and in space, let's say this is space, the type of dream in space is called condensation. So this is my answer that it is good to experiment with the sleep playlist systems, especially because of what what I'm about to bring up. Now, in time, the dream type that happens in time is called displacement. We talked about this in the previous Zoom call, but it's really interesting to bring it up again because it holds like a lot of space to help us understand what's happening. So understanding once again, space is simultaneity, everything happening all at once, and displacement would be one thing happening at a time. The dream displacement would be the type of dreaming where one dream follows another. So you can see why that's a little bit like time-based. Like in Jacques Lacan's thought, displacement in language is the aspect of language where we literally keep pushing meaning away. So actually, let me move meaning here so that we never arrive at the point. Like in psychology, displacement describes how we don't really get to the point. We don't get to the bottom line. We're not able to see the much bigger thing. And for those who knows Jacques Lacan, he's a psychoanalyst, just like Sigmund Freud, who perceives language as and consciousness is something that would never actually arrive at the truth because we're always going to be displacing. We can never handle the truth because the truth is so big and it's so repressed and it's in the real that we would be discombobulated once we actually arrive at the real truth. Now, dream condensation is quite interesting in Freud, where in coordination with Jacobson and a lot of the other structuralists, he celebrates dream condensation as the type of dreaming that's able to perceive the many parts within like a one whole thing. So as we well know, Sigmund Freud wrote the book on the interpretation of dreams. He was one of the first dream theorists. And for him, the dream condensation is a rare ability for the mind to look at the thing that's hard to look at. Because let's say when we're awake, we live in time. And it's very hard to arrive at like wholeness or the truth when we live in time because we're displacing. We're avoiding the truth, we're always sequencing events, so we're pushing meaning away. And so there's something about dreaming that actually allows us to perceive the whole thing, whether it be like nightmares or fantasies or these bear truth because it allows us to look at the many parts. There's so many parts there. It's like how can your mind perceive all the parts? In cognitive sciences, it's believed that you can only hold on at the very most to 3% of awareness in a conscious state. 97% is unconscious. So Sigmund Freud and Lacan and a lot of the other structures believe that the mind does have a possibility of taking in the whole. And sometimes we can do that in the dream time or the dream space. And because in inner dance, we are also going into a kind of dream space where we're creating the REM state, then it's exactly the same thing. So I'm enjoying listening to your sharing, Reinhilda, because I do feel that we're so unaware because we're always displacing and we're so busy. There's so many things that need to be done. Need to take care of the kids and go to work, take care of other people. So we're literally here. We're overwhelmed and we're unable to hold this. So inner dance or dreaming, which is the same thing, it helps us to practice how to hold the 97 or even the 100%. So in a way, we're healing our Freudian trauma of believing in the repressed like Freud talked about the iceberg, that this is the unconscious. But I believe that something's happening to minds and brains, bodies and spirits, that the unconscious is becoming the new conscious. So the 97% that we don't see, we're able to hold more. So I think that's why I talked about the default mode network, the reading, writing brain. We're able to hold on to a meta conscious or a super conscious brain state, which sometimes needs to pass through the weird because we're not we held that back. It's the unseen. um they're all there, the thoughts that we were not allowed to think, right? The experiences that we weren't allowed to have, everything that was repressed, that was ordered to us, like, no, like don't don't go there, and then here's like, go ahead, like yes. A lot of the what do you call this, the injunctions and the drivers spoken to us, that okay, that's not what good boys and good girls do, and you have to be this and that. A lot of that has been held back. So when you do open up the avenues for this to open, then that becomes like the new yes. And there has to be a transmutation or a transformation that happens inside people's bodies. So I think in the work that a lot of people do, like yours, like if we're dealing with patients, with people dealing with sicknesses, understanding that the sickness is actually maybe the repression, opening that up, then this becomes like an easy way, and the sleep playlist system would be one of the most effective ways to open that up. So I'm really fascinated by your feedback, and I think it's generally there's so much there, and I think there's so much that you're not even able to speak because it's there's so many changes happening. So
Yeah,
thank you.
indeed. I'm willing to continue to experience, and I will let you know later. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. I was also looking, while you were speaking about the looping pi, I was looking into the problem-solving model. And that's interesting though, because itself is also loop. And I was not clearly saying about seeing it, but now when we are talking about the loop, and then also thinking about how the brain is actually involved in the problem-solving model, it's very clear it's a loop. Yeah, it's thank you for this. And we have Gra as next. Hi, Gra.
Hi everyone. Okay, I'm here. There. I felt like sharing because two of the playlists that I've made this year or this past 2 months were brought up, and I was also like dealing with my observations of processes and thing. And yeah, just a side funny quick note, just today I had never experienced like the loop thing in a very physical material way. It was always like very emotional, more kind of things, and like thought loops as well. That also leads to action loops. But today I was like getting out of the cafeteria here. I was buying my last croissant here in Europe. I was like, okay, this is my last croissant because I'm leaving Europe tomorrow morning. And I have my story with gluten, with croissant, which is also in itself a loop, like a big, big loop in my body. I left the shop and I turned right to come back home. And there was this guy in this I think he's not able to walk, so he drives this little motor thing that, like these things that people ride when they cannot walk. And I was like, oh, this is super cool, this guy. And like we almost shocked. And like a block, I continue walking my block, which is just a block after like far from my house. And I turned the other corner and the guy was there. Like I passed the same guy 2 times. And I was like, does he have a twin brother? Like he must have a twin brother because like, can it be that it's him? So this was like very interesting. And yeah, so just this morning also I was going back into like, what does it mean to go back to where I'm going back? And what does it mean to be forward, to be going forward, and at the same time knowing and feeling all the changes. So I've always had like this relationship with loops as in they were just kind of like the same tunnel, but at the same time a different tunnel, because it's always a different view that I have from that tunnel. And in a way, it does free me up, or it does make me see how reality, or how we perceive as reality, like it's just a bunch of layers happening over and over again and delayering itself. And in that sense, like everything that I have lived here in Europe for the past 1 year, I have lived this 10 years ago when I was in Brazil and studying, and I had the same processes with people. Like they are now different people, but the energy, the signature behind that is just the same. And I was actually very happy today to realize that my reactions were different, that what I did back then 10 years 15 years ago was way different than what I did now. So I do thank for all the loops that I've been going through, and all the gluten that I've been eating, and all the demons and all of that, because I've been seeing how they are actually like, in a way, when I go too stressed about it, I remind myself that they are also like different, like opportunities to do different things with the same story. So okay, I've done that. What else can I do with this story? Like if I put a flower in the nose of the clown now, what does it happen? And then there's a story that happens. And then a while again, a while after it, I'm like at the clown again, with the clown again. What do I do now? Okay, let's take one arm of the clown and then like go experimenting on it. So this, in a way, like I don't know where this comes from. How does this have anything to deal with it? But I was looking at meaning and how my aphasia happened. How was my meaning making also affected by my aphasia, and what it meant, or how was it that I was sensing meaning, which was actually not sensing any meaning at all. Like I would be around a lot of people doing a lot of things, and my aphasia was actually a lot around the idea of conserving energy. And there were times that I went into aphasia just when I realized that like I'm going again into my loop of consuming my energy. So there was this system in my body that was like, I need to conserve things, and it shut down my speaking. So I started realizing, and it was one thing that was very, very frustrating, like physically painful for me in the beginning, to even speak, but also to be around words that were meaningless, because everything was just meaningless. So I was like, people were saying please, people were saying sorry, people were saying good morning, just because it's like a social thing. They learn how to do it. And one thing that is still really triggers me, it's been like 4 years since this event happened, but this is still like not a trigger in the same way, but it still makes me think about language all the time. It happens is, how are you? People asking me, how are you? And I'm like, which layer do you want to know? Like, how do you have time to talk about it? Do you have time to listen to it? So I started even telling people, like, do not ask me how I am anymore, because it's pointless. It really is pointless. It's really like meaningless in that sense. And there is one audio that I put in the latest playlist, which is Across Time, that is a question like, where do meanings come from? How do we generate them? And how do they generate? How do they come about? And a lot of this process of aphasia was kind of like going back into like having no meaning. And I was listening to what you guys were just talking, relating to the dreams and relating to the unconsciousness and to the real realm. And how like being in that space of not holding meaning allowed for so much meaning to emerge. So it was like, it was at that time that I started like having a lot of visions and demons and whatnot, and retrocausal memories, things that were happening ahead of time, and I was seeing them before they were happening. And everything just became like layer after layer after layer that I was living again and again. And it was related to that ability of holding the empty space where there is no meaning as at the same time. So the construction, and this, I think this I had to also go through within my process, that like I used to tell myself like, oh, I'm destroying myself, or people would tell me that, "Oh, you're destroying your mind, you're losing it," and whatever. But what happened afterwards was really like different, because I began more and more aware of the layers that were there. So it was almost like touching people's bodies and being aware of what is not said through those words that those people speak, but it's just still present. So you begin to have like this different this different relationship with presence and absence, in the sense that the layers, like they are there, visible, palpable, and all of that. And even words, like sometimes I feel the shape of the words in my body, like and how they concretize things. So this deconstruction, or this process, happened in a way that there were no building blocks to build anything, because it was pointless, it was meaningless, but the blocks were built. And this is what I'm seeing now from all of these conversations, and how I don't know how this here now happening. So thank you very much, and thank you for listening to the playlist as well, and putting yourself through it. It's quite a task.
I want to build on this. 'Cause there's really so much there. And I had some reasons why I am sharing the Jacobson essay. And it's not easy to see per se. Sometimes you need to have been doing inner dance continuously for a long time to see what is actually there. There's something quite near it based on what Gra is sharing, and we can enter it through what she shares. So I want to look at emotions and culture, but also in through the mirror of language styles. So understanding that time bears the context aphasia, and this is code. Like there were certain words that Gra shared that could be important, like social. Okay, so remembering, for example, that context aphasia is kind of brain phenomenon in people where a lot of the things people would say is based on what others said, you know. Filipinos are very much like that. Like they don't have much to say until they start hearing other people talk, and then they have so much to say. So the dynamic is very, very social in a way. Um, so in terms of um, cultural context, shame cultures are very much contextual in that way. Like context is about what is the environment, what is the ecosystem that delivers the message across. You know, what is the so I say shame, which is an anthropological cultural construct. There are guilt societies and shame societies. In shame societies, there's a high dependency on society. Like what is happening outside is more important than what is happening in the individual. So in code, we might say this could be more related to, let's say, ego or identity. Let's say individualism. Let's take out ego because it's too charged, like in a way. Um, and listening to Gra, we can't help but just really hear like okay, like what does it mean to hold one's own space, like a boundary for individual who grew up in, say, a shame environment where like I'm still learning how to hold like a boundary because I don't know. Um, I don't have a strong sense of individualism, and a lot of us might be coming from uh, this, which is the opposite of ego. It's more a collective consciousness kind of persona or cultural imprint. And this is primarily what we're learning. Like in shame environments, people take responsibility for the pain that other people would not. Like in individualized societies, that's your pain. Keep it away from me. Go far away with your pain. And this is my space, and there's clear boundaries. But in shame cultures or family systems, boundaries aren't clear. Boundaries are very, very vague, and so it's an actual brain state. And a lot of people, when they go kind of deep in the process, it's because they're beginning to absorb the room. They're beginning to feel the room. We're beginning to take responsibility for the room, and shame doesn't have to be toxic. It could be humility. It could be you just being humble. You're not coming from ego. You're taking responsibility. You're holding the collective. You're making more space for the collective. But it's really interesting that once you find yourself here, the other becomes really important. So that if you know how to hold space for the environment or the collective, you also need to contain that well. So people going into extreme code could lead into ego if there is a lack of ability to contextualize. Like sometimes people, when they become too space, which means spacey, it leads to a kind of solipsism where this sensitivity to the social, if that goes down, then ego would say, okay, I don't care about other people, it doesn't matter what other people are going through. With someone like Gra, that's not the case because she has such a high sensitivity to others. So this experimentation of learning to become an individual, no matter how much she tries to do that, she's always going to have this high sensitivity. And so when she brings up these topics like addiction, which could be related to what Ahilan is bringing up as to the fear avoidance cycle, which keeps the addiction loop happening. I think one of the interesting things inner dance brings to psychotherapists, psychoanalysts, psychologists in general is there's a lot of work on how to stop addiction simply for the sake of doing it. But what inner dance does is it actually allows us to go into the heart of the addiction. That it's okay to be in an addiction loop. It's just that you must do it with eyes wide open. That you can be experiencing a lot of the emotions, a lot of the repetitive thoughts that might be destructive, but if there is at least an observation of what is happening, then these two taking place at the same time, that is what does break the loop. And so this kind of structuralism, for me, it speaks a lot about either creating a self, which to many, like a lot of people, they don't have a self because when people are in shame cultures or personas, people don't know how to say no. It's always like, okay, I need to make others happy. It's always like a yes, and without knowing how to say no, there's a lack of boundary. So there is a reason why we would want to bring people into space and to allow code to happen, because ego formation is still quite an important aspect of holding, clear locus of control, clear responsibility, so that if people are too much in a shame conditioning, then there's very little responsibility. It's always pretty much a dependency or a reliance on what is happening outside. So thinking or studying what happens in the aphasia in code, this is a type of aphasia where it's not really the time to listen to others. It's more a time to introspect. You can see how that could lead to ego, but you can see how that could also lead to self-awareness, which to many may not have been given. So the playlist really brings a lot of space for this to happen. So especially the playlists that are more spacey, the playlists that are more cosmic, like the noise app. If you study that, the layered playlists, they bring more of the space element that allows for this to happen. And then the emotional or triggering playlists, they allow for social dynamic to take place, so that the conversations that need to happen between the self and the other can take place. And so this is one way of understanding why both are important. So this is another way of understanding structuralism. There's actually a lot more. We could just keep going on and on, looking at the different structuralisms that we're deconstructing and reconstructing. This makes the thing that we do a kind of TOE, or theory of everything, where we are actually being given a matrix to map out how dualities can come into unity. So thank you, Gra. I found that really helpful, actually, to map out the more like personal, aspects, even within a meta space.
So yes, we're open for questions or reflections or insights. So feel free to raise your hand and share your insights, thoughts, questions. Hi, Brennan.
Hi, Ra. First, I'd like to just thank Pi and everyone in the team for just getting this together. I probably would have still been procrastinating since Pi put those playlists up on the group chat. I've just thought, I can start. There's no reason. So I did a private session with two people a couple of weeks ago, and I did a group session on the weekend. And not surprisingly, but so much come up in that has come up in today's session, which again, I missed Wednesday's talk. I was having some surgery, and it's just come to me now that while you listen back on those sessions, are fantastic. Just being live in the session is, even if you're not speaking, you're still like co-creating. So it's even more fantastic, more amazing. But I'd like to go back to what Christian said about when he first experienced inner dance and felt exhausted. After holding space for the first group session, I was flying, like it was just buzzing all night. And the next 3 days, I was physically and mentally just drained. And I wasn't so surprised to be mentally drained, but physically, I was like I do ecstatic dancing most weeks, and my body's used to those movements. But I woke up, and the next 3 days, I could hardly walk. my leg muscles, my calves. There's muscles in there that hadn't been touched before. And it was quite a vibrant session for this one, holding the space. I felt like a 4-year-old running around the room, twirling around, dancing on my toes, whatever. I can't really remember too much. But I had quite a unique blend of people. And there's two people in the group that really sort of touched the heart at the end of it. And there's a 70-year-old Iranian lady who had witnessed the first session I did with 2 people 2 weeks ago. Her son was part of that. And she's just over here visiting her son, does not have a word of English. And I noticed during that first session, she was popping her head around, just really inquisitive. And then when I went to the group session this week for a practice run, because I've just booked out a hall to do 7 sessions in a row over the next 7 Sundays, I come back in with my speaker and the Iranian lady is laying on the floor ready to go. She was not missing out. She was like, wow. So straight away I thought, oh, this is something's going to happen here. This is special straight away. And this, I guess what I'm touching on now is going to touch a bit on what I was talking to Pi about last week. I forget the name of the word. We use it to trace out oscillators. One of the participants was bipolar. She's had a lot of trauma in her life, but she's like really, when she's up and going, she's so inclusive, other people, so vibrant, brings everybody in, and then she retreats to a private space. But I could feel that through the session as well, like her vibrancy at the start and her moving, opening, just letting the music run through and letting that, creating that non-static space was just, everything's moving. Almost like that space inspired the other people to be a bit more creative. And then when she went into her static space, it sort of opened up the floor for the others to start being non-static. And it was a beautiful synchronicity there of just random people coming together and creating. And it's a real eye-opener how in this community, how we can learn so much of people with like bipolar and that, as long as we give them the conditions to flow and realize when they're not flowing, they really need their rest, because when they're flowing, they're flowing at their peak. And it was quite an extremes of observing that flow, like the full intensity of it was full, it was giving everything. But also when in the rest position, in the fetal position, it was just the most beautiful stillness you could get. It was just so still, so comforting. We were touching on light language before. I was just 30% of the session was exactly like Pi said, gibberish, but it was just 30% of this light language was just coming and coming and coming. It wouldn't stop. And the participant with bipolar was in tears at some stage, and I just put my hands on her shoulder and all this light language come out. And afterwards she said, whatever you said then, what did you say? She kept asking, what did you say? I don't know. She goes, whatever it was just perfect for that moment. And then when the session closed, the Iranian lady come up and grabbed my put a hand on my forearm, and then just started stroking the front of my forearm. And she couldn't speak it to me, but she's just looking at her son, who'd been going through a lot of mental health issues, and he was still on the floor at total peace. And she just put her hand on her heart and just nodded, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. That's all she could say, the only English words she knew. She's like, she'd come over, I don't know how long since she's seen her son or why her son's, if he's come here as a political immigrant or whatever, I don't know. I don't know the history, but she's only been here 2 weeks. And I just felt like she was so, everything she needed in this trip was delivered then to see her son in that peaceful state. And then later on, I bought some essential oils back from Egypt. It's this particular Isis oil, rose. And her son translated later, I put an ink on their foreheads. I was actually really hesitant to put the oil on her head because I really, I don't know, you've got to be so politically correct in this world, and especially in this country at the moment. I didn't fully understand her background. If her husband was still alive, if he died, I didn't know anything, if it was religiously acceptable or whatever. But anyway, I just did it. And she got her son to translate after it. But when she was a baby girl, she used to boil up the rose petals. And they'd boil up lots and lots. And at the very top, there would be a little bit of oil left. And she knew that oil was the same oil that I put on her forehead. So, and she couldn't explain much more, but I could just see a sparkle in her eyes. It's like I took her back to her childhood, took her back to space with her mother. It was just beautiful. Yeah, so with the playlist, all I had was a small speaker and a small Bose speaker, which puts out a bit of sound, to be honest. I remember my father used to have these great big Kenwood speakers as a kid. These small Bose speakers amazingly put out better sounds than that, but it wasn't great sound. But also, I was able to pair it with this little Bose micro speaker, and I put it on the uterus, on the stomach. I plan to put it on everybody's stomach at some point. And I put it on the person with bipolar at first, and that was it. She was never going to let it go. It was on there for the whole session. So I sort of get how, I think Paula mentioned before about playing around with speaker positions and stuff like that is quite important. I was actually wondering during the talk then, could you just have your main music going for a setup and then have one of those little micro speakers going for a Bluetooth for a phone and just start moving that around the room like that. So while I wasn't able to create a playlist, I felt like when I was doing that, I was almost co-creating the playlist. It was just so good to not have to learn all this DJ software and music and organize it, which is not strong for me. Just be able to just get out there and do it. So I'm forever grateful for that. And the other thing is I had these little, I didn't have any drum or anything, but I bought these little metal discs, round little things you put on your fingers, these brass or copper things. I just had those in my fingers rattling. They're used for, I understand, belly dancers use them to click them together, click, clack, 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 which I couldn't get it much of a beat going, but I was just letting them rattle. And then I thought, oh God, all I'm doing is just constant light language and constant rattling the bells. People must be getting tired of it. And then for some reason, I just started grinding two discs together on either side of people's ears. People started squirming, and I felt like, whoa, I felt like a worm going through the earth. It was so grounding. I was just like, woof, 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 woof. I'm pretty sure I used is it long time playlists? I can't remember. I keep listening to these playlists and I go, I've got to go write a comment about this. And I go to write the comment and go, which playlist did I use? I can't remember. But anyway, I'm pretty sure it's long time. And yeah, it was just amazing. Everyone who was on a session as booked in for my first one this coming Sunday, so that obviously it has affected them. And the lady from Iran, she really touched my heart. She's just making cups of tea for everybody every day, all these Persian teas, and I can feel the softness. And I'm going to invite her to help co-facilitate on my first public sort of session, because I'm just going to ask her son to translate, like if at any moment she ever feels like getting up and moving about the room and comforting somebody, if she feels the need to hold somebody's hand and pray in Persian or say anything in Persian, she's just welcome to do it, and just let her move spontaneously. And she can, this is the beauty of it, she doesn't speak the language. I can just go copy me, just pray. All we have to do is put the hand in pray position, and then she just needs, I can just see she'll get one positive reaction from one person, and then it will just expand. And it'll almost be like light language, because it'll be only one other person more than likely who can speak Persian in the room. So it'll be just like an offering of just sincere dulcet tones from a beautiful language. So yeah, I'll just leave it at that. So thanks for listening, and I've enjoyed everybody talking today so much. So have a great day or great night. Bye-bye.
Thank you. There's one more raised hand from the shared account.
Hello. Good night from UAE. I would like to share experience that happened to me in one session, one of my first inner dance session, and also later facilitating a session. Someone had the same question. For me, it was kind of reviving a memory of like bringing like memories, and then having the question if it was real or no, if it was my imagination or it was really something that happened, like a real memory. And recently in a inner dance I facilitate, also a girl was having that same question, like she kind of saw the other part of a memory she had, but she was questioning if that was imagination or memory itself. And I'm wondering, from what you have, what you've been spoken about, the preverbal memories, the protolingual memories, all of that, how in our unconscious, how sometimes we can create random things, like imaginations that maybe bring meaning, bring insights. And how to navigate a little bit those questions that arise when it can be a difficult question to hold sometimes, especially when it's related to trauma. So yeah, I'm just wondering, I had that phrase that you say about breaking loops of trauma, and I would like you, if you could extend a little bit more on what exactly for you means breaking loops of trauma.
Okay, thank you. What's your name? because it just says, okay, thank you, Atiana. All right, so this is helpful also, just like the others. Like one way of understanding this different type of memory that um, comes up is by looking at another understanding of space and time. So I think we're traumatized by trauma because of our old maybe Newtonian three-dimensional understanding of time, where the past has already happened and we're victimized by the past. We have this idea that we can always change the future because the future hasn't yet happened. So let's say in three-dimensional time, the past exists here, and then there's the forward arrow of time where the future is here. But then when we start to access, I think one understanding of space, like what does space actually mean from, yeah, there are a lot of interesting movies, books, but also experiences of people where when we go to space, time isn't the same. So my own experience of the past when I had my spiritual awakening, was literally the past didn't actually exist. I think we're stuck in this gross understanding of time where the past is static, solid, concrete. And when we do experience space, let's say, think of space from the perspective of like when we die, or even before we're born, then it's non-linear time. We don't need to go too far. Like in the spiritual awakening, people do psychedelics, or especially when we dream, what we experience is almost like what you're describing. Did that really happen? Is that real? Because some dreams, they seem so real, even more real than reality. Then we wake up and then we realize it's just a dream. So I don't invalidate anything. I feel anything that comes up is actually an aspect of reality. That when we look at maybe fragments of the past, um, I feel if you open it up, let's say you make that bigger, we probably would find that there are like multiple versions of each past. Like from a spiritual way of looking at the past through space, then true space would mean that there are multiple dimensions of not just the present but also the past. Like all possible pasts have happened, and so I think there's this really curious thought experiment, and for me, I really believe it, that you're not able to just change the future. I think we also have the power to change the past, because the past is really just something we interpret, something we perceive. So when people do experience death, there are certain experiences where we perceive all the possible interpretations of what has happened and what did not happen. The birth vision is a lot more telling. It's a lot more accurate. So sometimes when people die and then they perceive what it's like to enter another life, and then they came back from that near death, and then they explained that there's this birth vision. The birth vision is the experience of all the possibilities by way of choices, eventualities. All the possible choices appear to the being. What I don't even know if I would call it a self. Like all the possible experiences, all rounded out within a birth vision, which is described by some teachers as the highest expression of love and light, the highest experience that could be possible for one being. I believe that that birth vision is always there. So it's all a matter of perspective. You know, we can either look at this one thing as a specific thing, or we could go inside the thing and realize that you can even go inside. I can't zoom in more, but you can probably go inside. You can zoom in more and more, and each of these points are universes unto themselves. And when we're stuck within a three-dimensional reality, then the thing becomes literal. But when you go inside, there's more dimensions there, and that's the reason why we are entering the point. And a point is really a network of points, which is a universe unto itself. And how deep can we go? So I think trauma has been repeated like way too much in many circles, and we're re-traumatizing by thinking and believing that traumas are static, and that would victimize us, because then why would we be held by the past when the past has already happened? What is a different way of perceiving everything? So to break that loop, there needs to be some belief structures that breaks the cycle. One possible statement could be, but everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a reason. Okay, I'm too lazy to write that whole sentence. And when you believe that everything happens for a reason, then that trauma had to happen, right? It's a matter of perspective. But if we don't believe that, let's say everything is separate, that wasn't meant to happen, then I'm stuck within like blame system. Oh, it's his fault or her fault, and I'm now in this shame or guilt system. Then what happens is the past starts to take over the now, rather than we make space for what is possible to hold the space for the present, right? So I think what we need to change is our conceptualization of time itself. So when we look at the symbols, the experiences, like what is real, and an experience is something that we're becoming conscious of. That is what an experience is. But technically, everything is inside. So we must take responsibility for absolutely everything. The experiences matter, but they also don't. So the experiences are illusions. But at the same time, they bring condensation to what is deeply embedded, like what is within. So the experiences mirror what we are perceiving, what we believe in, like what do we know. So the illusions are arbitrary. They would keep changing because our perceptions are changing. So instead of people getting mired or getting stuck with wanting to know, okay, is that experience real? Is it real? Is it true? Knowing that experiences are just mirrors for our perceptions, the new interest could be, how are we even making the experience? Like the difference there being, either you are created, which is traumatizing. It's like we're victims, or you are a creator. It's either you're a dream or you're a dreamer. This is like a world of difference. When the dream wakes up and realizes it's a dreamer, then it can just create another dream. So if it's dreaming of something, okay, that really happened. And if you have the power to become this, then why would you not break this? You know, why would you not create a new past? So the history is very, very interesting. Because as soon as you change your perspective now, you actually start finding things out in the past that are going to interrelate with how you're seeing things. So the past is going to expand. You will find things out that are historical that actually start to interrelate with your present. So if your now becomes more vibrant, becomes more clear, your past will also mirror that perspective. But if we're holding, let's say, a traumatized or a victimized now, then this is going to, for sure, like, we're always going to be finding things out about the past, because they're all just systems of interpretation, and they're all held within particular dimensions that we're in. And right now we are entering into new dimensions. The brain, the mind, the body is changing, but we're holding on to habits. We're holding on to habits, and those habits are not expansive. They're very contracted. So what makes this confusing is when we're hanging out with people who are holding on to linguistic or just structural ways of continuing the same connotations, then we're bound to repeat it. You have to somehow be the dreamer in the community, the one who helps other people remember what it means to dream again, and to learn what it means to truly create. And I think we're being given those tools now, and we're realizing it's not actually that hard to, yeah. I hope this makes sense. This is how I.
Oh, yeah, it makes sense. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Hi, Gra.
Hi, me again. Sorry if I'm taking space. I just wanted to share also like something that might help with this scenario of like what is real, what is not real. Something that came up, a memory of something that happened in 2019 when I was experiencing this retro-causal perception of time, or this multidimensional perception of time. I was just painting in my room, and then I started writing with one hand and answering things with another hand, like freely writing. So left hand writes something, like right hand asks a question, left hand answers a question. And things started to escalate into a dimension that I ended up unfolding a story of abuse, of trauma, of a person that killed another person. So in the beginning, while I was writing, since I also had a story of abuse in my story, sexual abuse, I was like, okay, this is my story unfolding again. But then as I started asking more questions about this story, to the other hand, it was another story that was coming up. It was a story about a father who killed the mother, and the child was abandoned. And I was like, while this was happening, like, actually my mom is still alive. So this is like, how far is this story my story in the timeline of my life? So it actually, like, while I was seeing this, my body started to react to that story. So I burst into tears and I started crying like a baby, and there was this huge amount of pain and memories and whatnot. So at that time, I was also dealing with this: what is real, what is not real, like especially with the memories that I was unfolding about my own story as Gra in this planet. What really helped me, and I don't know if I'm being repetitive now, maybe I am with what Pai was saying, but it did help me to look at the structure. I like looking at patterns and looking at the patterns that were coming through those memories and visions that were coming up. So instead of looking at what is real and what is not, I started to look at the structure behind those things. When would they appear? why would they appear? What was I doing? What was I eating? And all of those things. It might be feel a little bit too much, like to be analytical when this happened. But this structure or this way of understanding or trying to feel it actually helped me see more or reach what was behind this timeline perception, this linear timeline perception that we had. So it was also something that helped me navigate this a little bit with more ease. Like the other day, I was having this vision and I saw myself in this future, and I asked myself, what year is this? And she said, it's 2030. And then she gave me a message. And at that time I was like, okay, so I'm not going to the future to instead of looking at like, oh, I'm going to the future, I was looking at the more I'm going to the past. So something in the future, like, or this part of the future in me thought that, oh, I'm going to the past now to talk to Gra in this year. So this, and then she told me, so I was like, okay, so the future is changing my present, which is also helping me to change my past. And all of this and all of these stories, rather than trying to make the meaning out of it or ourselves, like, oh, it needs to have meaning, it needs to be present in something, or because meaning is also held within time, within context. So when we let go a little bit of that need to make meaning, meaning emerges from itself, and it's usually embedded in the structure, in the patterns that we see, and all that is behind these curtains. I like I'm finishing. Sorry, I like I don't know the translation, the English word for this, but in semantics there is this unity of meaning, which is called in Portuguese sema. So I forgot the name in English. So this is how I've been looking at all of this chaos. It might be me feel chaotic or too much to handle all of this condensation, but when we try to when we open or we start to analyze or see what is the unit of meaning of this, how does this unit or this part of meaning holds connection to the other part of my story or to the reality that I'm living, just like in a semantic network where you have a word that is connected to many other words to make meaning. So this is how this concept of sema and the unity of meaning that is connected to another unity of meaning has been helping me to really navigate this, what is real, what is not real, and this multidimensional things that happen. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Evie.
Hello, I have one little question. I heard Spy telling something about myelination in the brain and strengthening new synapses. I was just wondering, because a client and a friend of mine has the disease MS. So that is, I think, also a lack of myelin. And she had one session with me. During the session, it went very well, but afterwards her complaints got worse. So she had more physical complaints, and then she got a little bit anxious about the inner dance process, if it is secure for MS. So I was just wondering, could the new playlist perhaps attribute to more new synapses or myelin also, so that I can help her? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, it's a good question. We're gonna go more and more into this in the next months. So the playlist that wouldn't help MS would be dopaminergic in general, which would be the triggering. Like too much emotional triggers would release dopamine. So it's important that you bring in a lot more slow meditative elements, which allows for the production of what's called oligodendrocytes. and a lot of that actually comes from a chemical called prolactin. Prolactin is normally what creates breast milk. And the production, when prolactin isn't being used as breast milk, it becomes oligodendrocytes, which leads to myelination. So dopamine is something that's released when the music is too triggering, and dopamine actually inhibits prolactin production. And then it would inhibit myelination. So what you're looking for are GABAergic. GABA would be the inhibiting neurotransmitter. So anything that's very deep, that allows rest states. Myelination mostly happens in, for example, what's called slow wave sleep. So that's time during the sleep stages when there's a lot of delta and theta brain waves. So if you want to help with the myelination, then create a lot of delta. Hold like a lot of delta. It doesn't have to be music, just music. It's the way of holding the body, covering the body. They go fetal or they're just there like resting. But it could be true that there's some release does need to happen. But I think to strengthen first before you take them into waves, just keep listening to the body. So I think it's a really, really good question. And a lot of our research is to maybe take great care with conditions like these. Yeah. So thank you. I hope this helps. So
If
don't
I
give
can,
up. Don't give
no,
up.
if
Keep
I
going,
can,
but just regulate and modulate things.
yes, if I can add one positive comment after the inner dance sessions, she has been years in brain spotting therapy. And after the inner dance session, she had a new brain spotting session with her therapist, and it was the first time for years that she could go to one spot in the brain where she didn't have access before. So she was very positive about that. And if you could suggest one playlist, one of the existing playlists, would it be the sleep playlist then for her?
I would shop around within the sleep playlists. Like the anything is possible as a model. There's something about those playlist types that are not really, they're quite deep, and there's an absence of a rhythm that triggers people too much to release dopamine. But the sleep playlist you would shop around for. Try out synchronic. Look for a playlist called synchronic. I think it's inside the synthesis folder. There are trigger mechanisms, but they're quite tiny, and they go more to gamma frequencies if they go high, which is too fast for dopamine to really just release into what might be dangerous for MS. So try that out and see if it works. Thank you. So maybe we can close soon, Ahlan. Yeah, I think it's been quite a big call.
Yeah, it's almost 3 hours. Something interesting, funny. I've been looking into the transmutation, and then recently I watched the movie Dune. And when you take from the book to the translate into the movie, and it's actually creating image, sound, and a lot of gestures and a lot of things. It's actually it comes from a word, and then if you look into the different Dune interpretation in the movie, I feel like from one word, how many different transmutations are possible, and also what kind of feelings is even creating. When I look into the Dune from David Lynch, or now it's completely different, different dimension. So I found it super interesting to look into that too, and from the language
Even just the soundtrack of the movie is a movie unto itself. So just imagining what's just the sound aspect of the movie, which has nothing to do with the visual aspect. It had me. I watched it with my kids last week.
Yeah. Okay, if anyone has a question or something, we can just have a last, otherwise we can close. Okay, let's the name of the movie was Dune. The second one and second part is now out, so if you feel like watch, it's really interesting. And now please help us to close. Open your mic, your video, and make any sound, noise, gesture, movement, and say goodbye and good night and good morning.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Good
Good
night.
night. Thank you.